Around the year 1200 BCE, the great empires of the Bronze Age fell. The Hittites, the Mycenaeans, they just collapsed. It was total. It plunged the Mediterranean into a shadowy period, one that lasted centuries. That's the Bronze Age collapse. It's one of history's deepest mysteries. You have the Sea Peoples, this enigmatic force. You have a changing climate, a complex web of disasters, unraveling even the most advanced society. We sift through ash, through ancient texts. And the question is what that lost world 3,000 years ago tells us about our own. The world before the silence was a bright one. It was like an ancient internet, a network of palaces and ships connecting kingdoms over huge distances. You had rulers in Egypt, Anatolia, Greece. They weren't just aware of each other, they were in constant touch. They wrote letters on clay tablets, addressed each other as brothers, set up marriages between royal families, sent gifts. Gold, ivory, expensive cloth. The whole system depended on the movement of two metals, tin and copper, the ingredients for bronze. That was the lifeblood of the era, it's why we call it the Bronze Age. Control those trade routes and you held the power. You can see what that wealth built. The massive walls at places like Mycenae. The deep graves with their gold masks. For the people inside it, this order must have seemed like it would last forever. But permanence is an illusion. History breaks that illusion. For all its shining diplomacy and giant walls, that first global age had a shaky foundation. Its stability was a delicate balance. And the weights on that scale were starting to move. That network of trade and diplomacy, it all came back to one idea: the palace. You see these huge complexes from Greece over to Anatolia. They were the center of everything, not just where the king lived. They were command centers, economic hubs, sacred sites. Everything flowed through them. And to keep that system running, it took immense effort. In the Mycenaean world, the king, he had scribes, they tracked everything. Every jar of olive oil, every bolt of linen, every shipment of bronze. All of it recorded on clay tablets in that script, linear B. This was a command economy, massive in scale. The palace didn't just collect taxes, it told people what to produce. It stored the goods in giant storerooms, then it redistributed them as rations, as payment to soldiers and craftsmen. A system of total control meant to create stability, to project power. And for a long time it worked. It built those huge walls, it filled the tombs with gold, but that strength had a weakness. The whole structure was top-heavy. Every decision, every resource, all the planning, it all came from one center. That created bottlenecks. A scribe makes an error, a harvest fails in one region, a trade ship is lost, the shockwaves go straight to the core. And the local communities, they'd been stripped of their own reserves, stripped of the power to make decisions. They couldn't adapt, they couldn't cushion the blow. Over generations, that administrative weight, it may have strained the system's legitimacy. Local chieftains, regional elites, they'd watch the palace demand more and more while offering less. They could grow restless. That brilliant concentration of power, it built the grandeur. But it also made the whole civilization brittle, like a tall, beautifully made vase. Impressive to look at, but one good push in the wrong place and the whole thing could shatter. And as the 13th century BCE went on, those pushes started to arrive, not from within the palaces, from the world outside their walls. The first push came from the sky. It was quiet, it was the rain not falling. Scientists, paleoclimatologists, they study ancient weather. They've taken mud cores from lake beds all across the eastern Mediterranean. They look at pollen trapped in the soil layers. And what those silent records show is a major shift, a big change. Starting around the late 13th century BCE, the region hit a severe drought, a long one. This wasn't just one dry year. It could have lasted for decades. For the palace economies, that was a direct hit. Their whole system was built on surplus, on having extra grain. The scribes could count every last wheat kernel in the storeroom, but they couldn't make it rain. A few bad harvests in a row would empty those storerooms, and then comes famine. You can see the weakness in the geography itself. Take the Hittite capital. It was up on a high plateau in Anatolia, a fortress, seemingly unbreakable, but it was also a huge city to feed. It relied completely on grain shipped up from the fertile plains below. When those plains dried up, turned to dust, that lifeline was cut. No royal order could fill the granaries then. A city that can't feed its people is already falling, long before any enemy gets near the walls. So this climate idea, it changes the story. It's not just about kings and battles anymore. It becomes an ecological story. The main stress wasn't an invader, it was the world changing. The land was withering, and societies started coming apart from the inside. Local farmers, their fields failing year after year, they had a choice. Stay and face almost certain hardship, or leave, abandon the palace lands, go search for water, for food, for some kind of chance. That movement, desperate people displaced, it would have rippled outward, putting pressure on everywhere nearby. It creates a cascade, a wave of instability. Those mysterious raiders from the sea, they might not have been some organized army of destruction. They could have been the final symptom, a violent one, a wave of climate refugees pushed to the edges and then turning back toward the centers of wealth in a frantic fight just to survive. Our ancestors' fate was always tied to the land, to the environment. That lesson isn't written in triumph, it's written in dust. And in silence, the drought was one force at work, but there was another, a storm coming from the water. Egyptian scribes carved their victories on temple walls and they gave this storm a name, the Sea Peoples. Their arrival is the most dramatic moment in the whole collapse. Inscriptions from Pharaoh III show a chaotic naval battle. Egyptian archers firing from their ships onto enemy vessels. The warriors on those ships wore feathered headdresses. These carvings are our main view of them, and they are terrifying. The pharaoh claims a great victory. He says he saved Egypt from being swept away, but the fact he had to fight them so desperately, that tells us how powerful the threat was. Who were they? The records list strange names, foreign names. The many scholars think they later settled as the Philistines. But these are just labels given by their enemies. Their true origins are a puzzle, one of history's great puzzles, where they organized confederacies, pirates launching coordinated attacks from the Aegean Islands from the coasts of Anatolia, a warrior culture on the move looking for new lands to conquer, or is the truth more complicated, more tragic? Look closer at those Egyptian carvings. Alongside the warriors in their ships, the artists showed something else, something revealing, and in those carts, women and children, families, this wasn't just a raiding party. This was a migration, a whole people on the move. That detail changes everything. It suggests the Sea Peoples might not have been the cause of the collapse, they might have been its most visible consequence. Think of the world we just saw, decades of drought, failing palace economies, famine spreading. What would you do if your home could no longer support you? You would gather your family, you would pack what you could onto carts, into boats, and you would become a refugee, searching for any place that still had food, any place with stability. In that desperate search, you would run into the last bastions of order, the rich lands of the Nile Delta, the coastal cities of the Levant. And if those gates were closed to you, if the soldiers on the walls refused to let you in, what choice remained? You would fight, not for conquest, for survival. The line between a displaced family and a desperate marauder is thin, terrifyingly thin. So the Sea Peoples might be the perfect symbol of this entire era. Not a single mysterious enemy from the deep. They were a symptom, a human wave, created by all the other pressures, the climate shifts, the economic cracks, the social unrest, finally crashing on the shores of the powerful. They were both raiders and refugees. Their violence was real, it shattered kingdoms. But their story might begin not with a sword, with an empty granary, a dry field, a home that could no longer be a home. They are the human face of a system breaking apart, moving in a frantic, violent search for a new beginning. And their arrival meant that for the great palaces, the final push had come. That trade network was the third major crack. It was like a global supply chain for its time. The palaces didn't just want luxury goods, they needed them. Their whole military and economic power was based on one alloy, bronze. To make bronze, you need copper from places like Cyprus, and you need tin. That was the real issue. Tin was incredibly rare around the Mediterranean. The closest reliable sources were thousands of miles off in what's now Afghanistan or Central Europe. So you had this single fragile line of commerce, donkey caravans over mountains, ships along dangerous coasts, all to get this one metal to the kingdom workshops. That made the whole system interdependent. The Hittites might get tin from traders who got it from miners who followed no king. The Mycenaeans relied on merchants sailing from the Levant. It was a delicate chain, every link had to hold. Then picture that chain starting to break. Maybe pirates like the Sea Peoples raided the shipping lanes, maybe a key mining region fell into chaos, or a major hub, a city like Ugarit, was sacked. The tin flow would just stop. The consequences were immediate. Without tin, you can't make new bronze. Without new bronze, you can't forge fresh swords for soldiers. Can't cast new tools for farmers or shipbuilders. A society's technological base freezes, its military edge dulls. Think of a modern city suddenly without microchips or fuel, everything halts. This technological paralysis hit the heart of elite power. Kings and warriors derived status from bronze, their magnificent weapons, their ornate chariots. These were symbols of authority but also the practical tools of control. As bronze grew scarce, that authority visibly weakened. A local chieftain with a few old prized swords might start questioning the king who can't supply new ones. The prestige economy, built on gifting bronze, would collapse into a scramble for scraps. So the collapse wasn't just military or climate. It was a profound economic failure. Their globalization was their greatest strength until it became their fatal vulnerability. They built a world so connected that a shock in a distant mountain pass could unravel a palace's power hundreds of miles away. The kingdoms were tied together. When one fell, it pulled on the others, like a net. Cut one cord, the whole structure distorts and sags, so you have these three huge pressures converging: a changing climate straining agriculture, waves of displaced people testing the social order, and a critical economic network disintegrating. Anyone could challenge a civilization. Together, they were a perfect storm, but history is rarely as simple as a list of causes. The final act wasn't just about what happened to these societies. It was about how they responded at the end. The choices they made when the world was coming apart. The collapse wasn't just about defeat. It was also about survival. Because one civilization didn't fall, not all the way, Egypt held on. The pharaoh who faced that last biggest wave was the third, and he left a record of it, a stunning one. On his temple walls he carved a message. It starts with a line, a chilling one. Foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. No land could stand before them. He lists the names. The sea peoples. Then he describes the fight, a huge battle on land and water right at the mouth of the Nile. The carvings show Egyptian archers on their ships firing into the enemy fleet. They show fighting on the shore. It's chaos, a desperate defense. Claims total victory. Says he smashed them, turned them back like birds in a net. And in the most important way, he was right. Egypt didn't fall. Its government, its heart along the Nile, it survived. The kingdom wasn't erased, not like the Hittites or the Mycenaeans, but surviving came at a cost, a staggering one. The battle saved Egypt, but it broke the empire. The treasury was emptied to pay for it, the army was exhausted, and all those distant holdings, the ports and posts in the Levant that connected Egypt to the world, they were lost. Egypt turned inward. It retreated behind its borders, the deserts and the sea. And it began a long, slow decline from that imperial height. So why did Egypt endure when others shattered? Geography decided it. Egypt was a gift of the Nile, a fertile ribbon protected by deserts. It was a fortress with one gate, the Delta. An invader had to come by sea or along a narrow coastal road. They could be met in one place and stopped. More than that, the Nile's floods were predictable. While other places suffered drought for decades, the Nile kept rising. It kept watering the fields. The food supply, the agriculture that was crumbling elsewhere, it stayed mostly intact in Egypt. That gave the state the resources to field an army. It gave people a reason to stay, to fight for their home. Egypt's resilience shows something about collapse. It shows the disaster wasn't some magical, unstoppable force. It was a set of pressures that tested every weakness in a society's structure. Egypt had fewer weaknesses in its foundation. Its food was secure. Its core territory was defensible, so it bent. It bent terribly, but it didn't break. Still, even this bastion couldn't escape the new world being born. The victory at the Delta was a last stand for the old Bronze Age order. After that, the age of international diplomacy, of brother kings and gift exchange, it was over. Egypt survived, but it was alone then, alone in a fragmented, darkened landscape. The great network had gone silent. And in that silence, something new had to begin. The collapse brought a silence, not just political, it was a silence of writing itself. In the ruins of the palace, they found the last records, clay tablets, hardened by the fire that burned the place down, their inventories, lists of chariot wheels, offerings to the gods, women workers, and then nothing. The script they used, Linear B, was never written again. The same thing happened with the Hittites. Their cuneiform script, pressed into clay for generations, just stops. These writing systems didn't evolve, they vanished, as completely as the palaces that used them. That's one of the clearest signs of the end. Literacy collapsed. In the Bronze Age, writing was a tool of power, but it was widespread within the bureaucratic class. Scribes were essential. They kept the whole system running. Then, almost overnight, that class was gone. The knowledge of how to form these symbols, how to record a harvest or a treaty, was lost. It retreated to a vanishing few. You can picture that last scribe, in a dusty storeroom, putting down his stylus, not knowing he was the last. The loss is hard to grasp. It was more than forgetting how to write. It was the disintegration of memory. Tax records, legal codes, diplomatic letters, literature, all the paperwork of civilization turned to dust, or lay there unreadable. The state's ability to organize, to plan, to remember its own laws and debts evaporated. It created a historical amnesia, so deep that later Greeks remembered the great Mycenaean palaces only as the work of giants. Though the real king Agamemnon became a figure of legend, his city a ghost story. So we're left with two sources to piece this together: the silent stones of archaeology, the layers of ash, the abandoned weapons, and the echoes in later myths. The epic poems of Homer, written down centuries later, might hold fragments of memory from that lost age. Tales of a great war at a place called Troy, of warriors in bronze armor. But these are echoes, distorted by time and storytelling. They're not records. This severing of the written thread shows what holds a complex society together. It's not just walls or armies, it's information. The continuous living record of who owes what, who rules where, what happened last year. When that thread is cut, the fabric unravels. People didn't forget how to live. They farmed, they raised families, they told stories. But they entered a world of oral tradition and local memory. The grand, interconnected narrative of kingdoms and kings was gone. The darkness of the Greek Dark Ages was, in part, a darkness of the written record. A silence that forces us to listen instead to the whispers from the ground. That silence in the archives, it's hiding another kind of sound. The sound of a society tearing itself apart from within. We've talked about invaders, drought, trade breaking down. But the fourth crack in that Bronze Age world might have been the most intimate one. And the most dangerous, internal revolt. You think about the structure. The palace was everything. It commanded all the grain, all the bronze, all the wealth. It handed out rations, it demanded labor. For generations, that system gave you order. But what happens when the order fails? When the palace promises protection and food and then the storerooms are empty? That social contract, that unspoken agreement between the powerful and the people, it shatters. Archaeology shows us hints of this fracture. At some sites, the destruction pattern tells you something. It doesn't look like a sacking by an outside army. There's evidence of fire, sure, but also targeted violence. Certain buildings, the grand ones, the administrative centers, they're burned more thoroughly. The places of power. Meanwhile, simpler houses might be left relatively alone. That suggests a rage directed inward, a rebellion against the local rulers themselves. So you wonder, after years of poor harvests, with families going hungry while the elites held onto their symbols of status, did the population finally turn? A desperate peasantry, maybe joined by lower-level soldiers or officials who saw the system crumbling, rising up against the very center that was supposed to sustain them. It wouldn't have been a coordinated revolution, not like we think of it now, more like a final, furious unraveling. When the king can no longer be a provider, he becomes just another man with too much food. And this idea finds an echo, a distorted one, in later Greek stories. The tradition talks about the Dorian invasion, a wave of simpler, warlike people from the north who swept down and overthrew the Mycenaean kingdoms. Most historians now see that less as a literal invasion and more as a folk memory, a story crafted centuries later to explain a catastrophic change. But inside that myth, there might be a kernel of truth about internal upheaval. It could preserve a memory of populations on the move, of old hierarchies being violently overturned from within by groups who were always part of the landscape, but now saw their chance. This layer adds a human dimension to the collapse. It wasn't just a civilization falling to outside forces. It was also a social explosion. The immense pressure of all those other crises, the famine, the economic paralysis, that pressure likely found its release in conflict between classes. The ruling elite, whose legitimacy was built on control and distribution, they became targets when there was nothing left to distribute but blame. So the end came not only with the crash of foreign ships on the shore, but with the crackle of fire in the central hall. Not only with the silence of empty trade routes, but with the shouts of a populace that had run out of patience. The collapse from this angle becomes a revolutionary moment, a bloody, chaotic reset. It makes you look at the ash in the ruins and ask, whose hand held the torch? Sometimes, the greatest threat to a palace doesn't march from over the horizon. It grows in the streets just outside its gate. The ground holds the final testimony. You find it across the ancient world, from Anatolia down to the Syrian coast. A shared layer, a dark line in the soil, ash and charcoal and collapsed. That's the burn layer. It's the physical signature of the collapse. At the Hittite capital, the evidence is overwhelming. The gates, the temples, the archives, all show signs of intense, deliberate fire. The heat was so great its stone turned it to glass. This wasn't an accident. This was a conflagration meant to erase. The same story repeats in Greece, at the Mycenaean palaces. The central halls were burned to their foundations. The fire seems targeted, systematic, aimed at the very seats of power. But the most haunting evidence comes from a port city, Ugarit on the Syrian coast. It was a hub of international trade. Its destruction was swift and total. In the ruins, they found a clay tablet. It had been placed in a kiln to be hardened, to be preserved. But the firing process was never finished. The city burned around it. The message on that tablet is a frantic dispatch. It reports enemy ships have been sighted. It says our own ships are out on patrol, they are not here to defend us. The text ends abruptly. The scribe never finished baking his warning. It's a moment frozen in time, a snapshot of pure panic. These burn layers tell a unified story, violent, sudden ends. Yet the pattern isn't uniform. Not every city met its fate in flames. Some places show no sign of attack at all. Their walls are intact. Their buildings stand empty. The people simply left. They gathered what they could carry and walked away. Their streets fell into a profound silence. This patchwork is a crucial clue, destruction and abandonment. It tells us the collapse wasn't a single coordinated invasion, not a tide sweeping across the map. It was a rolling crisis, a wave of instability that washed over regions at different times with different force. Some communities were overwhelmed by violence. Others saw the writing on the wall and chose a quieter exodus, fading into the countryside before the storm hit. So we're left with these silent, empty streets, and they challenge us with a question. Who set the fires? Was it the sea peoples arriving from the sea to loot and burn? Was it internal revolt, a populace turning on their own rulers? Or could some of these fires have been set by the people themselves, a final ritual act to purify a doomed place, to prevent its capture, to mark an ending so complete that only fire could close the chapter? The archaeology gives us the fact of the ash, but not the motive behind the spark. It presents a landscape of endings, each one a little different, each one asking us to listen to what the stones are trying to say about the last days of a world. The silence in Greece was the deepest. After the fires at Mycenaean, no one rebuilt the halls. The population didn't just decline, it plummeted. Up to 90% of people may have disappeared. They died or they moved away. The writing system stopped. The bureaucracy, the specialized crafts like fresco painting and fine metalworking, they just ended. For about 400 years, mainland Greece entered what we call the Greek Dark Ages, and the name fits. It's a time almost invisible to us, a historical shadow. The light of that complex society had gone out. The change in daily life was total. People left the lowland plains, the old palace wheat fields. They moved into the hills instead, to smaller places, more defensible sites. The economy shifted from centralized agriculture to something simpler, more mobile, pastoralism, herding sheep and goats. This wasn't just a change in work, it was a change in worldview. A herder's life is nomadic, tied to the flock, not a king's granary. Communities became tiny, isolated. Each valley was its own little world. The beautiful, intricate art of the Mycenaeans gave way to pottery with simple geometric patterns, a radical simplification of everything. This was collapse in its form, not a replacement by another empire, but a shedding of complexity itself. The palace system, that towering, interconnected thing, had proven too fragile, too demanding. When it fell, people didn't rebuild it. They walked away from the very idea of it. For generations, they lived in a scaled-down world, where the most important connections were to family and flock, not to a distant ruler or a foreign trader. And here's one of history's great ironies. This period of profound loss, this 400-year retreat, was also a necessary clearing. The old, rigid hierarchy was gone. The weight of that top-heavy administration was lifted. In its place, these small, scattered communities began to develop on their own. They had to solve their own problems, govern their own affairs, defend their own flocks. Out of that localized experience, new political ideas slowly began to form. The seeds of the classical Greek city-state, the polis, were planted in this rocky soil. Unknowingly, the fierce independence, the local identity, the debate among citizens, those traits were nurtured in the quiet isolation of the Dark Ages. Later Greeks, like the poet Homer, looked back. They saw a hazy, golden age of heroes before the silence. They told stories of Agamemnon and Achilles, a great war at Troy, but these were myths, fragments of memory passed down orally, distorted by centuries of forgetting. The real Mycenaean world, with its clay tablets and tax collectors, was utterly lost to them. The collapse had been so complete it broke the chain of memory. It created a clean slate, however harsh the process of wiping it had been. So this Greek story shows something. Collapse is not always a final ending. Sometimes it's a brutal, involuntary simplification. A society hitting a reset button. The creative destruction of the old makes space, however painfully. It makes space for something new to eventually grow. And this pattern of collapse clearing the way for rebirth, it's not unique to the Aegean. It's a recurring echo. That long silence also saw a quiet revolution in the workshop. The fifth crack in the old world was a transformation of technology itself. For centuries, power was forged in bronze, but bronze had a critical weakness. Its ingredients were controlled by kings. The collapse of those trade routes didn't just cause a shortage, it created a necessity. People needed a new metal, and the answer was lying in the ground almost everywhere: iron. Unlike the rare tin for bronze, iron ore was common. You could find it in bogs, in certain clays, in hillsides. But there was a catch. Working iron is far more difficult. Bronze melts at a lower temperature. You can cast it, pour it into molds. Iron requires a much hotter fire. You have to smelt it, then hammer it, fold it, shape it while it's red hot. It's a craft of patience and skill, so the shift wasn't overnight. In the chaotic centuries after the palaces fell, the knowledge of ironworking spread slowly. It was a technology suited to a fragmented world. A village blacksmith with a simple furnace and anvil could produce tools and weapons. He didn't need a king's permission or a shipment of tin from across the sea. The monopoly on metal was broken. That had long-term consequences. The old palace economies derived power from controlling the bronze supply. They armed their elites, they gifted symbols of status. When iron became widespread, that centralized control evaporated. A local chieftain with a good smith could outfit a band of fighters. A community could equip its farmers with better plowshares. Power began to diffuse, and think of the material itself. A bronze sword is a beautiful, gleaming object, but it's also relatively soft. It can bend. An iron sword, properly forged, is tougher. It holds a sharper edge. It's a more democratic tool, not just for the king's champion, but for many more people. So there's a paradox in the collapse. The catastrophic end of the Bronze Age order cleared the path for the Iron Age. It broke the stranglehold of a scarce resource and forced innovation with a plentiful one. The fall of the great states created the conditions for a decentralized, accessible technology to flourish. This wasn't progress in the way we think of it. No one in those dark years looked at the ruins and said this was a step forward. It was a brutal, involuntary change. Survival demanded new solutions. Yet from that struggle, a new kind of power structure began to emerge. One less dependent on far-flung networks and palace bureaucracies. One where strength could be forged locally from the common earth. The age of empires had ended. The age of city-states, of smaller, independent communities, was being born in the smoke and the silence. And with that new landscape came a new chapter, where the memory of the Great Collapse began to fade into legend. From that clearing, eventually new life did come. In the eastern Mediterranean, along that coast where the great empires had been, two groups moved into the empty space. They didn't rebuild the old palaces, they built something new. The Phoenicians, they stayed on the coast in cities like Tyre and Sidon. With the Hittites gone from the north and Egypt pulling back, they didn't look to the land, they looked to the sea. They became the great sailors, the great traders of the early Iron Age. Their ships were small, nimble. They didn't carry armies, they carried goods. Purple dye from sea snails, a color so rare it meant royalty. Glass, timber, metalwork. They connected the broken pieces of the world after the collapse, setting up trading posts from Cyprus to North Africa and farther. Their biggest innovation, though, wasn't a product. It was symbols, an alphabet, simple about 24 letters, each one a sound. It was a complete break from the complex scripts of the palace bureaucracies. This system was easy to learn, easy to use. It didn't need years of scribal training. And as the Phoenicians traded, they spread this tool. It was adopted by the Greeks, adapted, and from there it traveled through time to become the foundation of our own writing. Meanwhile, inland from that coast, another people were rising, the Aramaeans. They set up kingdoms in places like Damascus. Their power wasn't naval, it was commercial and it was linguistic. As trade routes shifted away from the old imperial capitals, Aramaean merchants and caravans became the crucial link. Their language, Aramaic, started as a marketplace tongue, but its simplicity, its utility made it spread. It became the common language for diplomacy and commerce across the Near East, spoken from Egypt to Persia. Long after the empires that tried to control the region were dust, Aramaic endured. The success of these two cultures shows something about collapse. It doesn't just destroy, it creates empty spaces. And in those spaces, there's room for new kinds of power to grow. The Phoenicians and Aramaeans, they thrived not by recreating the top-heavy, militaristic empires of the Bronze Age. They mastered specific vital skills in a broken world. One mastered the sea lanes and the art of the deal. The other mastered the overland routes and the language of connection. They were agile, decentralized, pragmatic. Their story is one of adaptation. It shows that catastrophe, while devastating, can also shatter old constraints. It can clear the ground for innovations that a rigid order might have stifled. From the ashes of that imperial collapse, they built the first truly international networks of the Iron Age. Networks based not on royal command, but on mutual interest, on communication. They took the pieces of a shattered system and assembled something more flexible, more resilient, and in many ways more enduring. The collapse left its biggest mark not in writing or stone. It went into story. When the written record stops, memory changes form. It turns into myth. And two of our oldest myths, the Trojan War and the Exodus, could be these distant, warped reflections of that world ending. Homer's Iliad, written down in the 8th century BCE, is about a huge war. Greek kings band together to lay siege to the powerful city of Troy. The heroes are in bronze armor. They ride chariots into battle. It all feels like that lost Mycenaean world. But Homer was singing this centuries later in the Greek Dark Ages. So what was he actually remembering? Is a long-standing question, whether the Trojan War stories hold a blurred memory of real conflicts, not over a single person but over something much more tangible, trade routes. Troy controlled the crucial sea lane into the Black Sea, a major route for grain and metals. Mycenaean kingdoms who needed that trade might have fought Troy for control. Over generations, those fights could have merged into one story, a single epic 10-year siege. The myth isn't history, but it's a piece of history. A way for a people who'd lost their past to explain where they came from, to give their broken world a grand, heroic beginning. A similar thing seems to have happened in Canaan. The biblical stories of the Exodus and the conquest are central. They tell of a people escaping slavery, wandering, and then coming into a promised land. The timing is interesting. These stories were written down much later, but they're set in a period that lines up with the late Bronze Age collapse and what came after. This was a time of huge movement. The Egyptian Empire was losing its hold on Canaan. City-states were getting weaker. And as we know, groups of people were on the move everywhere, some by choice, some forced. So the story of a migrating group entering a land in chaos, of walls falling and new societies forming, it fits. It fits the archaeology of a region in upheaval. It doesn't match a single, quick military campaign, but it resonates with a longer, messier process. Settlement and cultural change over generations. These aren't literal records, they're something stronger. They're how cultures work through a trauma, how they make sense of a catastrophe that wiped out their grandparents' world. The collapse was a profound break, a lost golden age of giants and god-kings. In the quiet after, people asked why. Why did the great cities fall? Why did the old order disappear? The answers they built were stories. Stories of divine intervention, of heroic struggle, of trials in the wilderness. They took threads of half-remembered things, a famine, a battle at a gate, a long journey, and wove them into a tapestry that explained who they were. The trauma of the collapse was digested into identity. The chaos was given a plot, a point. So when we read about Achilles' rage or the sea parting, we're not reading history. We're hearing the deep, echoing sound of a civilization's end, transformed over centuries into a story about a beginning. These stories are powerful, but they're echoes. Archaeology and history today don't look for a single villain or a simple cause. The most compelling explanation now for the collapse, it isn't about one thing going wrong. It's about everything going wrong at once. That's the sixth crack, the final one. A model called systemic failure, a perfect storm. You have to picture that late Bronze Age civilization not as separate kingdoms, but as one vast, interconnected engine. An engine running on trade, agriculture, administration, diplomacy. A complex system. It hummed along for centuries, but complex systems have many moving parts, and when multiple parts fail at the same time, the whole machine can seize. Take that decades-long drought. That was a critical fuel shortage. The engine couldn't run without the agricultural surplus, the food for its cities, for its workers. Then the breakdown in the tin and copper trade. That was like a vital gear snapping. The specialized parts for maintenance, for military power, they just stopped arriving. Internal social unrest, that was the internal friction. The grinding of parts that lost their lubrication. The lubrication of trust, of legitimacy. The machine began to heat up from within, and the movements of displaced people, the sea peoples, that was the massive external shock. A sudden, violent blow to a structure already straining. Here's the crucial thing. None of these stressors alone was probably enough. The Bronze Age world had weathered droughts before. It had survived piracy, rebellion, but they'd never happened all together, in a relentless cascade over the same few generations. Each problem amplified the others. The drought made people desperate, and that fueled unrest and migration. That migration disrupted trade routes further. The trade collapse then crippled the military response. The response to the unrest and to the external threats, it was a vicious feedback loop, inescapable. The system, so brilliant in its interconnection, became its own trap. Its greatest strength, its interdependence, became its fatal flaw, when the shocks came from multiple directions at once. This model, it's from modern interdisciplinary work. It weaves together clues, from ancient mud cores that tell of climate, from shipwrecks that speak of trade, from burnt tablets that hint at administration, from settlement patterns that show depopulation. It refuses a simple answer because the past is rarely simple. It acknowledges a truth about advanced societies. They are inherently fragile. Their complexity, which gives them such power, also creates more points of failure. More links in a chain that can break. And this framework, it does more than explain the past. It holds up a mirror, a sobering one. We live in our own age of profound interconnection. A global network of finance, information, supply chains. It's the modern equivalent of those Bronze Age trade routes. Our systems are also tested by climate stresses, by economic disruptions, by social fractures. So the story of the collapse isn't just an ancient mystery solved. It's a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities woven into the fabric of a complex world. It asks us to look at our own humming engine and to consider, not if it will fail, but what we do to make it more resilient. When multiple storms converge, the parallels are too stark to ignore. You have this globalized network thriving on long-distance trade for critical resources, and then it gets strained. A changing climate, social unrest. That description fits the late Bronze Age, but it also maps onto our own world. We don't rely on tin from Afghanistan. We rely on semiconductors from Taiwan, rare earth minerals from specific regions. Our climate isn't shifting over centuries. The signals are appearing in decades. The lesson isn't about a specific date. It's about a pattern of vulnerability that emerges when societies become too complex, too interconnected, too specialized. The Bronze Age collapse is a case study in systemic risk. Those palace economies pursued peak efficiency. They centralized grain storage. They monopolized metal supplies. They optimized trade routes. That created immense wealth for a time, but it also eliminated redundancy. When the single source of tin dried up, there was no backup plan. When the centralized granaries failed, there were no local reserves. Their quest for maximum efficiency made them fragile. Resilience, history suggests, often requires a bit of slack in the system. Some duplication, some local self-sufficiency. It's the difference between a single towering tree and a dense forest. The tree is majestic, but a single storm can topple it. The forest may lose individual trees, but the ecosystem endures. Another warning echoes from those burned archives. It's about the distance between decision makers and reality. The Mycenaean and his scribes, counting jars of oil, might have received reports of failing harvests. But did they understand the desperation in the villages? Could they perceive the growing resentment as their commands continued while the land withered? Elites in any age can become insulated, surrounded by data that confirms their worldview, detached from the lived experience of the people they govern. In a crisis, that detachment can be fatal. It breaks the social contract, the unspoken agreement that holds a civilization together. When leadership is seen as out of touch, the collective will to defend the system evaporates. People stop believing in the palace, and then there is the cascade effect. A drought in Anatolia helped topple an empire in Greece. A conflict in one shipping lane disrupted economies 1,000 miles away. The collapse demonstrates how we are all linked, a chain of mutual dependence. A problem in one node of the network doesn't stay contained. It travels, it amplifies. Today, a pandemic, a blockade in a key waterway, a crop failure in a breadbasket region. These send instant shockwaves through financial markets, through supermarket shelves worldwide. The Bronze Age world discovered this the hard way. We are living with this reality. This isn't a prophecy of doom. It's an invitation to learn, to look at our own civilization's pillars and ask uncomfortable questions. Which of our critical systems have single points of failure? Or have we sacrificed resilience for short-term efficiency? How do we maintain social cohesion when faced with shared challenges? The past doesn't give us answers. It illuminates the questions we should be asking. It shifts our focus from merely building taller towers to also weaving stronger nets. The people of the late Bronze Age couldn't see the perfect storm forming. We, with the benefit of their story, have no such excuse. Their silence across 3,000 years is not just a mystery. It's a conversation about what we value, what we build, and what we are willing to protect. The scale of this event is measured in silent villages, empty hearths. For every palace that burned, there were 1,000 homes left behind. For every king whose name was forgotten, there were countless families whose stories just vanished. This collapse wasn't a political transition. It was a human experience, felt in the stomach of a hungry child, in the weary steps of people who had to leave. You can see traces of this in the archaeology if you look, not in grand inscriptions, in the small things, a cooking pot left in a hurry, a child's toy buried in the dust on a floor. Animal bones show signs of stress, slaughtered younger, a desperate attempt to get every last bit of nourishment from a herd that was dwindling. These are artifacts of hardship. They tell us the margin for error had disappeared. Take a farmer in the final years of a Mycenaean kingdom. His family worked land assigned by the palace for generations. They delivered part of their harvest to the storerooms. In return, they got some security. Then the rain stopped. The soil turned to dust, and the palace, its own granaries emptying, would have demanded more, not less. The social contract that ordered his world was breaking. He faced an impossible choice: stay and face almost certain hardship with his family, or gather what he could and leave. But go where? Into the hills, toward the coast. He became part of that slow, desperate migration, a human current searching for any place that still held life. That movement reshaped the map. Coastal regions saw sudden, crowded settlements as people fled turmoil inland. Then, just as suddenly, those too could be abandoned. It was a world on the move, not for conquest, for survival. In Egyptian carvings of the sea peoples, those weren't military vehicles. They were homes on wheels, carrying the essentials of a family's existence. Each one was a story of loss, a place left behind forever. And with this movement came other shadows. Where malnutrition takes hold, illness follows. The health challenges of such a period would have been immense, reshaping family structures, community bonds, in tragic ways. Loss of specialized knowledge meant more than forgetting how to build a fresco. It meant forgetting how to treat certain ailments, how to preserve food through a hard season, how to maintain the irrigation systems that once made the desert bloom. An entire generation grew up in a diminished world, where the technological and cultural comforts of their grandparents became half-remembered legends. Their horizons literally shrank, from a map of interconnected kingdoms to the view from a fortified hilltop. This personal dimension changes how we understand collapse. It moves the story from the throne room to the hearth, from the fate of empires to the fate of a single family, huddled together for warmth in a time of great uncertainty. Their universal needs, safety, food, community, became the driving forces of history then. The material culture they left behind, those simple geometric pots, crude tools, they aren't signs of ignorance, they're testaments to resilience, to the human instinct to make do, to adapt, to create anew from the fragments of a broken world. Their story isn't one of majestic decline, it's one of countless quiet acts of courage and endurance, most of which left no name behind. It grounds the epic in the intimate. History's greatest shifts are always felt one life at a time. Military power in the Bronze Age had a sound. It was the sound of chariot wheels. This was the ultimate weapon but also the ultimate symbol. A single chariot was a masterpiece, the engineering, the expense. The lightweight wooden frame, the spoked wheels, all the bronze fittings. Then you had the horses, specially bred, specially trained, and the crew, a driver and a warrior. Both were aristocrats, highly trained. They were like the tanks of the ancient world, fast, terrifying on open ground. They projected the king's authority right there on the battlefield. But that dominance relied on an entire system, a fragile ecosystem. You needed specialized craftsmen for maintenance. You needed secure trade routes for the metals and the timber. You needed stable kingdoms to breed the horses, to train them. And you needed a social hierarchy, one that kept that warrior elite supplied and in command. When that interconnected system started to fail, the chariot corps felt it first. The economic collapse meant bronze grew scarce. The fittings, the weapons, the disruption of trade and agriculture, that made it a crushing burden to feed and maintain those large stables of warhorses. And the social unrest, it may have eroded the very class of aristocrats who made up the chariot crews. You can't command a chariot charge if you're putting down a rebellion in your own city. Into that vulnerability stepped a different fighter. The depictions of the sea peoples, they show them on foot or in ships, not in chariots. Their weaponry in the Egyptian carvings shows long slashing swords, bundles of javelins. This was an infantryman's toolkit. It required less specialized metalworking than a chariot. It was cheaper to produce. And it was devastatingly effective in the kind of combat that defined that era. Chaotic, close-quarters combat. Raids, the defense of sacked cities. A javelin could disable a horse. A long sword could outreach the shorter weapons of the traditional infantry. These were tools for a more fluid kind of warfare, decentralized. That shift in military technology mirrored the broader fragmentation. Perfectly. The chariot was the weapon of a centralized hierarchical state. It required top-down organization, immense capital. The infantryman with his sword and javelin, he could be effective as part of a mob, a raiding party, a local militia. He represented a diffusion of lethal power. Armies no longer needed to be royal institutions. They could be bands of the desperate, the ambitious, the displaced. The archaeology shows this. In the destruction layers from this period, you find fewer of the ornate chariot fittings. You find more of the simple weapons, the utilitarian ones, spear points, long sword fragments. The material record tells that story. It's a story of democratized violence. The paradigm of war was evolving, out of necessity, to suit a world where the old centers of power were crumbling. So the fall of the chariot, it's more than a tactical footnote. It's a direct reflection of the collapse itself. That expensive, complex system couldn't survive the unraveling. The economic unraveling, the social one. In its place arose a simpler form of combat, more adaptable, and in many ways more brutal, one that required less civilization to sustain it. This transformation on the battlefield didn't cause the collapse, but it accelerated it. It ensured that when kingdoms faltered, the forces that filled the vacuum, they weren't mirror images of the old order. They were something new, forged in the chaos. And they fought in a way that made the return of the chariot kings impossible. The ground wasn't always still. The seventh possible crack in that world, it didn't come from the sky or the sea. It came from the planet itself. Some researchers point to a series of major earthquakes, a seismic storm moving across the eastern Mediterranean at that fragile moment. The region is a puzzle of fault lines where tectonic plates meet. A major tremor there, it would be more than a natural event. It would be an attack on the symbols of civilization. Think of a powerful earthquake hitting a late Bronze Age city. Those Cyclopean walls at Mycenae, a source of pride and security, they could be shaken apart, stone tumbling from its careful. The plumbing and drainage systems, engineering marvels for their time, shattered. A single quake could collapse a palace's central hall in minutes. It could rupture vital cisterns, cutting off the water supply. This destruction would have no human face, no enemy to fight, no strategy to counter. It would be a force of nature, indifferent and absolute. Evidence for this idea exists, though it's subtle. At ancient Troy, archaeologists see layers of destruction that align with seismic activity, twisted walls, collapsed foundations that suggest violent shaking. Similar signs have been debated at Mycenaean centers. The challenge is earthquake damage can look like damage from warfare or deliberate demolition. Fire often follows. The evidence becomes a tangled knot, yet the theory persists because it fits the geography and the timing. This layer introduces chance into the story of the collapse. After years of drought and social strain, a society is already on a knife's edge. Then the earth moves. Key fortifications become rubble. Storehouses are buried. The psychological impact alone would be devastating. For a people who saw the world as governed by divine will, such an event could be the ultimate sign of disfavor. The gods themselves were shaking the foundations of order. It transforms the narrative from a purely human drama into an ecological and geological one. It reminds us our ancestors, for all their ingenuity, were always tenants on an active, restless planet. Their greatest constructions were temporary arrangements against forces that operate on a scale of. A sequence of such seismic events, an earthquake storm, could have delivered the final, demoralizing blows to kingdoms already struggling to stand. So we add this possibility to the mosaic, not as a single cause, but as a potential accelerant. Random, catastrophic variable in an already volatile equation. It underscores the model in a humbling way. It suggests the Great Collapse may have been a convergence of human vulnerabilities and planetary forces. A reminder that civilization is always a temporary agreement, not just between people, but with the very earth we build upon. You see the end not in what shows up, but in what's gone. After the burn layers, the record gets quiet in a different way. The luxury goods are missing. In the dirt from the 12th century BCE onward, you don't find certain things anymore. Baltic amber, that golden resin from the far north. African ivory carved into ornaments. Lapis lazuli, that deep blue stone from Afghanistan. These were status symbols for the Bronze Age elite. Gifts between kings, proof of a connected world. Their sudden scarcity, that's a story of networks breaking. The highways of prestige commerce went dark, but one absence is louder: tin. That dull metal was the lifeblood of the era. You can't make bronze without it, and after the collapse, tin becomes a ghost. Archaeologists find hordes of bronze objects, but new tin for making fresh bronze, it almost vanishes. That's a silent catastrophe. It means the long-distance trade routes, those chains across mountains and seas, were cut, probably for good. Think about what that meant. A workshop in a Mycenaean town. The metalworker has copper, he has the skill. But his tin supply, which used to come on ships from the east, hasn't arrived in years. So he melts down old, broken bronze, he recycles, the alloy gets impure. The weapons he makes are weaker, more brittle. Eventually the scrap runs out, and the workshop goes quiet. That technological paralysis would have spread, from port to inland palace, crippling not just armies but the whole economy of prestige. The system that moved these metals was also a system of political loyalty. A local chieftain pledged to the king partly because the king supplied the bronze for his warriors' swords. When that supply dried up, so did a key source of royal authority. The end of this material conversation was the true death of the international system. Those trade routes weren't just for goods, they were channels for ideas, for art styles, for news and diplomatic messages. An ivory figurine from Egypt might inspire an artisan in Greece. A shipment of lapis lazuli to a Hittite temple cemented an alliance. The flow of objects was a continuous, silent dialogue between civilizations. When it stopped, the dialogue ended. Each region, each surviving community was left in deepening isolation. They turned inward. The shared cultural language of the late Bronze Age, seen in similar art, similar weapons, similar palace architecture, it began to fragment into local dialects, then into silence. The archaeology of absence is powerful. It shows a collapse not just of people and places, but of connections. The map of the world for the people living through it literally shrank. Their horizons pulled back. From the expanse of continents to the borders of their own valley, the great web had been cut. And in the quiet that followed, people had to learn how to live without the things and without the world they once knew. The words they spoke changed. Language is a living map, and the collapse completely redrew it. In Anatolia, the great halls of had echoed with Hittite. It was an Indo-European tongue used for treaties, for royal decrees. It was the language of an empire's administration. After the fires, that language faded from daily use. It became a secret of the stones, it was forgotten, and in its place other tongues rose. Luwian, already spoken in the south, became more prominent. Later, Phrygian moved in from the west. These shifts weren't just about vocabulary, they were the sound of new people. New power structures, filling the silence of fallen kingdom left behind. Across the Aegean in Greece, a similar shift happened. The Mycenaean dialect, the one recorded in Linear B, vanished with the palaces. The Greek that emerged from the Dark Ages was different. Historians note the spread of the Dorian dialect. This change is often tied to stories of population movements, groups coming down from the north. Whether it was a large migration or a cultural diffusion among shattered communities, the result was a new way of speaking. The very rhythm of life had a different sound. But the most transformative revolution happened in the Levant, along that coast between the great powers. Here, out of the fragmented aftermath, new languages crystallized into written form. Hebrew took shape, the language of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Phoenician flourished in the coastal cities. It became the vehicle for their vast trading network, and Aramaic began its long journey, from a local dialect to a universal language of commerce and empire. These weren't just new tools for communication. Each carried a distinct worldview, a new cultural identity being forged from the ashes. The Phoenician alphabet, with its simple, accessible letters, was a democratic breakthrough. It broke the scribal monopoly of the old palace bureaucracies. The persistence of Egyptian shows another side of this story. There was continuity where the state, though diminished, never fully broke. The language of the pharaohs evolved, but it remained, a thread connecting the age of empire to what came after. Elsewhere, the break was cognitive. To lose your language is to lose a specific way of ordering reality. The myths, the jokes, the terms for kinship and authority, they all shift. When a child no longer learns the words of their great-grandparents' prayers, a profound reorientation is complete. The past becomes truly foreign. These linguistic fingerprints are some of our clearest evidence. They trace roots of migration, the retreat of old elites, the confidence of new ones. They mark where old identities dissolved and new ones coalesced. The sound of the Bronze Age world with its Hittite treaties and Mycenaean inventories was replaced by a chorus of new voices, each declaring in its own unique syllables that a new age had begun. Even with everything we know, some doors stay closed. The Hittite royal family's story doesn't end when burned. The capital was left empty, its gates open. But the king, what happened to him? To the queens, the children, the silence is deep here. One main idea is that the royal court didn't just disappear. They might have made a long journey south, to northern Syria where smaller Hittite city-states appeared later. These were remnant kingdoms. They held onto pieces of Hittite culture, their art, their identity, for centuries after the heartland was gone. So the last great king, did he rule from one of those distant fortresses? A king in exile watching his world become just one city? Or did the dynasty end on that road with local governors just taking the old titles for themselves? We have no royal tombs from this time, no final words. Their resting place, the fate of their line, it's one of history's quietest vanishings. Then there are ghosts in the records. The tablets from talk about powerful kingdoms they traded with, fought with. One name keeps coming up. Scholars study these references. The geography, the descriptions, they point strongly to being a major Mycenaean Greek power. Maybe the world of Agamemnon itself. But where was its center? Which of the palace sites we know matches this partner and rival the Hittite kings wrote about? Was it Mycenae, or Thebes, or some major site still undiscovered? We have the name, but we can't put it firmly on a map. It's a shadow empire, defined by its connection to another, both gone now. That's why the collapse isn't a closed book. It's a living field of research. Every digging season holds possibility. Recent work at places like TLOs in Turkey finds new layers, showing how complex the shift from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age really was. One clay tablet, a new settlement pattern, it can make historians rethink an old idea. The puzzle is huge and we're still finding pieces. Some might be lost for good, but the search itself ties us across It turns the collapse from a distant disaster into a conversation that keeps going. We're not just learning about them. We're still listening in a way for their answer, A silent, invisible army might have been there too. The eighth crack was biological. Ancient texts mention it. Hittite prayers ask for relief from a plague. Egyptian records from that time talk about a pestilence. We don't have direct proof of a specific pandemic, but the conditions were perfect. Failing harvests mean malnutrition, and that weakens immune systems. Displaced people crowded into camps or cities under siege create a perfect place for disease to spread. And the trade routes, the ones that connected everything, they become highways for pathogens. A merchant carrying cloth could be carrying a virus. The impact of that kind of crisis would be catastrophic in a way warfare is. An army can't fight a fever. A plague could wipe out military ranks overnight, leave a kingdom defenseless. It could strike at the leadership itself, wipe out a royal court, a council, the administrators who kept the whole system running. Losing that concentrated knowledge would be a blow you might not recover from. And then there's the psychological weight. When an unseen force hits a community, morale shatters, trust breaks down. People might see it as a punishment, a sign the gods have abandoned them. The social fabric, already strained by famine, could unravel completely under that pressure. It reminds us that human history is linked with the history of microbes. Epidemiological crises work in the shadows of kings and battles, but their power to change civilizations is immense. It's a dark side of being connected. The same networks that spread ideas and wealth can spread devastation, with a speed that leaves no time to adapt. For societies already on the brink, a major pandemic could have been the final push. It wouldn't just reduce the number of people. It would break the spirit of the living, make rebuilding seem futile. The silence after the collapse would be personal, felt in every household. So the great depopulation of that era takes on another dimension. It wasn't only about people fleeing or falling in battle. It was also about the quiet, empty spaces left by illness. A reminder that the fate of empires can hinge on the smallest, most ancient adversaries. The label Dark Age suggests an emptiness, but maybe that darkness wasn't a void. Maybe it was a kind of workshop. After the palaces fell, people weren't just forgetting civilization. They were learning to be something else. The old system's weight was gone. No more king's scribes counting jars of oil. No more demands to send grain to a distant capital. This wasn't just losing complexity. It was a liberation from a specific control. Communities were small and scattered now. They had to govern themselves, solve their own disputes, defend their own flocks, make their own decisions about water and land. And from that local necessity, a seed was planted. The idea that a community of citizens could be responsible for its own fate. That was the slow, unrecorded start of the polis. The Greek city-state, its fierce local identity, its debate-based politics, they were forged not in grandeur, but in the hard, quiet work of survival. The technology shows this shift. Iron was the democratic metal. Its ore was common, unlike bronze. A village blacksmith with a simple furnace could make a plowshare, or a sword, that broke the royal monopoly on power. Strength could now be forged locally from the ground at your feet. It redistributed potential. Let those smaller, agile communities arm themselves, sustain themselves, without a palace's permission. Innovation thrived in this scaled-down world, not in towering monuments, but in practical, accessible tools. And without written records, memory found a new vessel, the oral tradition. Around fires in those isolated villages, stories were told and retold, tales of a greater past of heroes and wars. They were woven together, refined over generations. That was the creative crucible that eventually produced Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They aren't records of the Mycenaean world, but they are its profound legacy, shaped and given meaning by the people of the so-called Dark Ages. They turned fragments of a lost civilization into a foundational mythology for a new one. So this period is a paradox. It was a time of hardship, diminished horizons, lost knowledge, but by burning away the rigid, top-heavy structures of the Bronze Age, it created a space, a necessary space, where new political ideas could ferment, new technologies, new cultural forms, in the darkness. The collapse can be reframed. It was a brutal simplification, a societal reset. But from that cleared ground, watered by struggle, the resilient seeds of the classical world began slowly to grow. We're not just hearing about the collapse from kings anymore. Archaeology's been changing, listening to the land itself and to the people who lived on it. Science gives us ways to look past the burned palaces into the lives of ordinary people caught in all that. Satellite imagery, for example, it scans from above, shows the faint outlines of ancient walls and roads buried for thousands of years. Leads archaeologists to settlements that never left a written name. It's like a map of whispers, the ground hinting at stories we'd forgotten. Then there's stable isotope analysis. It reads chemical signatures locked in ancient teeth. Minerals and elements from food and water in childhood, they leave a permanent record, so you can see where someone grew up, what they ate. Imagine studying remains buried in the ashes of Ugarit and finding out that person spent their childhood far inland, near the failing farms of Anatolia. That skeleton isn't silent anymore, it's a story of displacement. Someone who moved across a fractured landscape before they died. It turns migration theories into personal biographies. And maybe the most profound new lens is ancient DNA. Extracting genetic material from remains dated to this period, researchers are starting to map population movements and mixtures with real precision. We can ask questions texts never answer. Did new genetic groups appear in Greece after the Mycenaean palaces fell? Did populations in coastal Canaan shift in a way that matches settlement stories? This moves us past labels like sea peoples or invaders. Lets us see the actual flow of human families over generations. It democratizes history, shifts focus from the elite few who commissioned inscriptions to the countless individuals whose lives were reshaped by forces they couldn't control. Each of these tools is a new key unlocking doors in a mansion we thought we knew. They let us test old theories with hard data. Was there a sudden influx of newcomers or a gradual blending? Did diets deteriorate sharply? Was there famine? The answers aren't guesswork now. They're coming from the soil, from bones, from the chemistry of the past. This scientific journey keeps going. The story of the Bronze Age collapse isn't a closed book, it's a living narrative. Every technological advance offers another perspective, reminds us the echoes of that ancient catastrophe still have things to teach us if we know how to listen. The Bronze Age collapse is a reminder. These glittering civilizations were fragile. Their end wasn't one event. It was a symphony of disasters. A changing climate strained the land. Waves of displaced people arrived. Critical trade routes snapped. Social contracts within kingdoms frayed. And moving through the ports, the camps, illness took its toll. Each pressure alone was a challenge. Together, they became a trap. That interconnectedness, what made that first global age so brilliant, so wealthy, it became the channel for its unraveling. A drought in Anatolia could topple a palace in Greece. A broken trade link in Cyprus could dull the swords of an army 1,000 miles away. It was a perfect storm. Converging on a world optimized for peak efficiency, but not for resilience. From those ashes, new life did rise. The long silence wasn't empty, it was a workshop. In the scaled-down communities of the Greek hills, the seeds of the city-state were planted. Along the Levanten coast, the Phoenicians mastered the sea. They gifted the world an alphabet. The difficult craft of ironworking spread. It broke the royal monopoly on metal, on power. The old, rigid hierarchies were gone. In their place, through struggle, new peoples, new technologies, new ideas slowly took shape. This is the duality of collapse. It's an ending of catastrophic scale, but it's also a clearing, a brutal, involuntary simplification. It makes space for something different to grow. Humanity's capacity to adapt, to rebuild from fragments, is written into this story, as clearly as the burned layers in the soil. This ancient story holds up a mirror to our own glittering, interconnected age. We live in a world of profound interdependence, of just-in-time supply chains, digital networks that span the globe. Our systems are tested by climate stresses, by economic disruptions, by social fractures. The warning from 3,000 years ago isn't a prophecy of doom. It's an invitation to learn, to look at our own civilization's pillars, to ask questions. Where have we sacrificed resilience for short-term efficiency? How do we maintain social cohesion, trust, when faced with shared challenges? The past doesn't give us answers. It illuminates the questions we should be asking. The vanished empires left behind more than ruins. They left a testament, a whisper about the fragility of complex order, but they also left a testament to the human spirit, that drive to create, to connect, to begin again. Their silence is a conversation that continues, challenging us to build not just for height, but for strength, for flexibility.